I went through NFL.com and I pulled some stuff that we could talk about today. So I put together a little graphic for you guys that we can go ahead and talk about here. My keyboard keeps messing up on me. NFL.com released their first power rankings, a way too early power rankings post-draft here for us to be able to go through, and I'm very intrigued by this list here. So let's talk about this a little bit because some of the people in these positions here, or some of the teams rather, interesting in my opinion. So at number one, honestly, like numbers 1 through 4 wouldn't really argue. Number 1, Tampa Bay, obviously Super Bowl champions. Kansas City, I would say, are right behind them at the number 2 spot. Buffalo, Green Bay, the losers in the championship games, I would literally put them right in those same spots as well. Baltimore and Cleveland fall into place after them at 5 and 6. Then from there, LA Rams at 7, Seattle at 8, San Francisco's at 9, New Orleans at 10. I would argue that I think San Francisco might be a little bit high there. They're coming off, a 6-10 season, and a lot of people are going to argue that, this is a playoff-ready team. But at the end of the day, the quarterback situation isn't really, figured out. Who knows how Jimmy G is going to play coming off of the, kind of like tumultuous season that he ended off with last year. So, I would probably put them a little bit lower, somewhere like mid-teens, maybe lower teens, but like the mid-teens, 13, 14, 15, 16, somewhere around there, maybe. New Orleans at number 10. This is one that I'd also argue as well. Doesn't really make sense to me. Granted, the entire team is really good, but at the end of the day, the quarterback position is so important. You can like a good example of this is like when you look at what Andrew Luck did going into the Indianapolis Colts his first year. He took a team that went from 2-14 to 11-5, and he hit a lot of deficiencies on that team with his play. Like a quarterback can make such a big difference for a team. And Jimmy G, I guess, is like a good example as well, because the year prior, before him getting there, the 49ers did not look great. He started the last 6 games, won 6 straight. They went to the Super Bowl. They lost him 6-10. So there's, Patriots, another one, dynasty type team. They were 12-4 the year prior. They lose Tom Brady 7-9. So, quarterback makes such a big deal for the team. And for me, New Orleans at number 10 does not really make sense there. Again, another team I'd probably move into like the mid-teens area. Pittsburgh's at 11. I think that's a good spot for them. Tennessee, that's probably a good spot as well. Indianapolis, I would probably put Indy over Tennessee, and this is not me being a Colts fan over like Tennessee or anything like that, AFC South rivalry. This is more so me just looking at it in terms of like Tennessee lost a lot. Indianapolis really didn't, and Indianapolis had a pretty strong draft as well. The whole Caleb Farley thing has been something that like people are kind of split on with Tennessee, so I don't really know how that whole I just think Indianapolis would probably be ahead of Tennessee per these like way too early power rankings. That's kind of where I would fit them. Miami's at 14, Los Angeles Chargers at 15, Arizona's at 16. I would push Arizona up a little bit higher. So like you have somebody like San Francisco and New Orleans in the 9 and 10 slot. If you slid them back, Arizona goes up to like those higher teen areas. That's probably, or even like somewhere like 12, 11, because like Pittsburgh and those teams would move up a little bit there. Like San Francisco and New Orleans, you got to knock down and move some people up. Arizona, I think, is rated a little bit low here. Minnesota, New England, Chicago, Las Vegas. I think these teams are right where they need to be. New England's a big question mark with the quarterback. Obviously, they brought in Mac Jones, but is Cam Newton really going to be better than what he was last year? You don't really know until the season rolls out. So that's something of interest to me and something we'll kind of have to look at. But I think that, from like 17 to 20, I definitely would agree with these. 21, 22, honestly, and people would probably argue that Dallas is supposed to be higher, but honestly, Dallas was 2-3 when Dak Prescott was there. They went really defensive heavy in the draft, and I give them major props for that. I'm a big fan of what their draft looked like because they needed to work on that defense, but until we see results, I think Dallas is in the right spot. Same with New York. Atlanta, Washington football team, in my opinion, should be above Dallas and New York. That's something that doesn't make sense to me. They literally won the division, and you bring in somebody like Ryan Fitzpatrick as the quarterback there. Going from Alex Smith to Ryan Fitzpatrick is about that's about as even as a swap as you could have for a quarterback. So I think that works in my opinion. I don't understand how you would rate Washington below the teams that they beat out for the playoff spot. That doesn't really make sense to me there. Again, Dallas had a really good draft and so did New York. The rosters look a little bit loaded, but you also want to playoff a bit based on like Washington's defense is the best defense out of that division. So that's just a weird thing for me. And honestly, like Washington was a team that had a good offseason, good draft or solid draft, I would say, and then really good like free agent pickups for the team. Like I just don't understand where that whole like how that all equates out to being set up that way. And then the bottom of the barrel teams, I think, are as about where they should be. Philadelphia could probably be lower. Denver, New York Jets, Carolina's at 28, Cincinnati at 29. I think they deserve to be a little bit higher, but 29 is fair. I wouldn't argue that or die on that hill. Jacksonville at 30. Houston is probably the biggest outlier. This one, they should be 32. I understand that the Lions are going through like a full rebuild, but they're in a better quarterback situation right now with Jared Goff than Houston, because if what everyone's saying is true, Houston might not even have a quarterback next year. At least, I mean, I don't think Tyrod Taylor is a better quarterback than Jared Goff. If somebody wants to argue with that, yeah, I mean, go for it. But that's something that's kind of a question mark to me. I don't really understand that there. I would put Houston at 32. And again, not me being a Colts fan saying, forget Detroit, forget Houston, but Houston is probably the number 32 team in the league, and I think just about everybody would argue that. And if I was a Detroit fan, I'd be scratching my head a little bit as well. I think the Detroit Lions roster is a little bit better than Houston as well. They have some people there. So that's the power rankings here. I don't know if I'm going to do a power ranking. I don't know if I'm going to, or at least anytime soon. I would probably do a power ranking as we get closer to the actual regular season. Like, I think power rankings make sense as you're running through the season. Something so early, I don't know, like right now, it's just like, it's kind of just like picking names out of a hat, like, and fitting them in where you think they belong. It's interesting to look at, sure, but in my opinion, power rankings don't really make sense until you get closer to the regular season. Like preseason, once you see some people doing some stuff like week 2 or 3 of the preseason, there's only 2 weeks of the preseason now. So like week 2 of the preseason or so, you have a good idea. Yeah, right before you get into the actual regular season, but that's the power rankings. Those are my thoughts on there. There's a couple of teams that, overall, I think the list is solid. Again, there's a few teams that don't really make sense to me. The line, Houston should be number 32. I think Washington football team should be at the very least like 19 on this list. If I'm going to really sit here and look at these numbers right now, I would put Washington right at 19 or 18. They were a playoff team. I don't see why they're below teams that were not a playoff team. That does not really make sense to me. They have a killer defense. I would put Indy over Tennessee, San Francisco, and the New Orleans Saints. Both those teams got to get knocked down into the mid teams, and everyone from there below them needs to get shifted up at least a spot or two. Then, overall though, the list is really strong. Like, I think the top like 8 teams, you could argue like a spot or two here and there, but overall solid list, not too much to complain about. There's just a few questionable ones there in my opinion.